This is a system that's there, it's for your benefit, it's evolutionary in nature, and it turns on every time you feel threatened and you don't have a say in it, right? You don't have a say whether your body's gonna catch you after you trip, it just does. You're no longer on that cell phone call. So here is a metaphor that we find is very useful as a teaching tool to help understand what's going on here, okay? So think about your nervous system like a marble on a track. It has weight, it has gravity that's acting upon it. And this is because nervous system activation is a state of tension, right? So when we're frightened like that, like in the car driving example, our body is tight, and that requires biological energy to be that tight. And the marble ultimately wants to seek the most stable, relaxed, and efficient position possible. And what that basically means is that, if we're looking back at that driving example, here we are, the marble is activated because, we're about to lose control of the car. There's a lot of tension and biological energy being expended here. But let's say that, you regain control of your car and you realize that, wow, it's pretty slippery out here. And if I drive home more slowly, you're going to be okay. And let's say, that's what happens. You get home and you're safe and sound. So in that case, the threat level goes all the way back down to zero, right? You're safe. There's no danger anymore. And so the marble, your nervous system wants to move that marble back down to that state zero place, simply because if there's no danger, there's no reason to be that tight and activated and anxious and upset. And this happens pretty soon after one of these scares takes place, right? So basically, you get that shock, you're about to lose control, and just a minute or two later, once everything's okay, your body starts to relax, your breathing returns to normal, the adrenaline leaves your system, right? So this is what it looks like in this case. The marble wants to roll back down to state zero, okay? Telling us that the human nervous system is a lot more complex than this, right? And there's very good reasons for this, which we'll get into. So the nervous system can retain activation even when the threat has passed, right? So we're saying that even when the danger is over, your body has ways of keeping that marble in that heightened state. And this is due to what are called attractor states or resting places built into the nervous system. And again, if we go back to the map, it looks something like this, right? So take a look at that state 1 trough, right? That little dip there that it holds the marble, and it's considered a stable state. It's an attractor state that's built into the nervous system. And here's what it's doing there, right? So to kind of explain this, I'm going to switch our example from the car to zebras. Okay, so let's imagine that we're all zebras. We're hanging out on the African plains. It's a nice sunny day. We're eating grass, right? So our nervous systems are at state zero. And then we hear some rustling in the bushes. Right? So if you're out in the wild and you're in a state of nature, rustling in the bushes could just be the wind, or it can be a predator. So let's say that, we hear the rustling in the bushes, we're the zebras again, and we look over and this time it's just the wind. And what happens in that case is that the nervous system rolls the marble back down to state zero, right? There's no threat here. But let's say a couple of hours goes by and we see more rustling in the bushes. And this time when we look over, it's a lion, right? And she's stalking us. And I don't know if you've ever seen these National Geographic type specials on TV, but when an animal is, when this situation happens, the lion will stalk the zebra potentially for hours until she finds the perfect zebra in the perfect situation, and then she'll go for it, right? So basically the nervous system has a state 1 trough to say, there's danger here, you should keep your eye on it, but it's not imminent, right? She's not running after you. You don't have to run away. You just have to be aware of it. And because of that, it's defined here as mild stress, meaning that the animal or our nervous systems, when we're being stalked like this, are in a condition of mild stress. And here are the symptoms of mild stress, right? So increased energy, fear, anxiety, anger, hyper alertness, right? So guys, think about this, that these are typically, we're describing what people would come into therapy for and say, you know, I've got a lot of anxiety, I've got a lot of anger, I've got a lot of, I'm constantly like looking out for danger, or I'm on edge all the time or something like that, right? So people would come in and talk about that. And in our world, these symptoms are painful and they don't make sense necessarily. But I want you to consider what it's like if you're in a state of nature and you're being stalked, right? You would want these reactions taking place, right? If you're that zebra, you want to be hyper alert. You want to have some anxiety. You want to have increased energy, right? So these biological responses make sense in a state of nature. And the thing here, guys, that might be to note is that, you know, our entire nervous system evolved. The mammalian nervous system took millions and millions of years to evolve. And for most of that evolution, we were in a state of nature, meaning that we were on the food chain, right? We're what's for dinner at times. And so because of that, you know, we have these reactions. It's only been in the last, 1,000 years or something like that, where we have had enough sense of civilization and protection with that we're not in a state of nature, right? So right now, these reactions seem strange and something we just want to get rid of. But I'm asking you to take a look at these and where they might have come from, right? That they actually make sense in a particular context, right? So continuing on, excitement, again, is a state 1 response, right? Because people go on roller coasters, we see scary movies, excitement. Mild stress can be pleasurable. Irritability, annoyance, increased heart rate, increased breath speed. Insomnia, right? Insomnia is a big symptom of state 1. And again, if you're being stalked, it's a good idea to not fall asleep, right? Your system's trying to help you out here. Somatic tensions, tight muscles, headaches, other pains, sensations of heat, restlessness, feeling fidgety, right? So these are sort of the folks that are constantly wiggling, constantly moving, constantly having to be doing something. Speedy thoughts, and then feeling nervous, right? So, so everything is kind of sped up in state 1. It's your sympathetic nervous system saying, there's danger, keep your eye on it, okay? Another way to sort of think about the differences here between being in state 0 and state 1, think about state 0 as Hawaii, right? Like it's resourced, it's calm, you go there for a vacation, it's perfect weather. If you're hungry, you just reach up and pick your mango off of the tree. I don't know if that's the case. I've never been to Hawaii, but that's my fantasy of it. So state 0, that's Hawaii, right? Now state 1 is New York, right? It's living in Manhattan. And so think about the crowds, think about the subway systems and how your system just has to be a little more amped up to kind of deal with that, right? And again, people like that experience. People want that kind of speedy thing because it can be nice. But you know, you also, if your system is at state 1 for years and years and years, you're going to have some neurosis. You're going to have some repercussions from living there all this time, right? Now, let's move on. Let's talk about what happens when that line decides to go for it, right? So at some point, she's going to pick out the perfect zebra after stalking us for a while, and then she's going to take off. And it's think about it like a coiled spring, and it just launches, right? And when she takes off, we take off, because if we don't, then we die, right? If you don't run when that line takes off, you're going to be the zebra that the line goes for. And so basically in that situation, everybody's nervous system just bumped up to state 2, right? So state 2 is defined as high stress. It's maximum activation, maximum performance. So guys, this is the realm of panic attacks, right? This is the realm of sort of intense fear, terror, that kind of thing. And the reason why we're not drawing it as a trough, right? We're not drawing it as it's not a stable state, right? Meaning that we can only be at state 2 for short periods of time. Like, it's a sprint. It's not a marathon. And again, if you've seen this on National Geographic or that kind of thing, where the line will take off and she'll either get her prey in 30 seconds or so, or she won't get her prey in that period of time. But either way, the chase is over, right? Because the expenditure of energy is so high that we can't maintain it. So that's why we're drawing it as a flat line. Right? And here are the symptoms of state 2, high stress. Panic, right? Hyperventilation, heart racing, sweating, shaking and trembling. And again, guys, so if you suffer from panic attacks, I get it. It's a very difficult, scary experience. You don't have control. You know, this is a very difficult thing to happen to us. But put it in the context of being threatened, being chased, and your life is on the line, right? If you are that zebra that the lion is going after, you want this. You want this level of explosive energy. You want this level of sort of hyperventilation and maximum performance. Because if you don't have access to it, you're gonna die, right? So this is your ally. This is your body saying, there's a great deal of danger here. You gotta go, right? So shaking and trembling, overall lots of body tension, muscle contractions. Rage happens here, right? Whereas in state 1 you might get anger, in state 2 you get the maximum version of that, so you get rage. In state 1 you might get fear, in state 2 you'll get terror, right? Again, maximum performance, very fast thinking. And guys, when I say fast thinking, I'm not saying good thinking. I'm not saying like, you know, you're well reasoned here or anything like that. I'm just saying that your mind is operating very quickly and it's making decisions very quickly, right? So there's a lot of that fast brain, like primitive nervous system action going on here. And then finally, again, it does not last very long. So getting back to the map, you may be asking yourself, okay, that's anxiety, that's panic. Where's depression on this map? So we're getting there, right? So basically everything that we've covered so far is stress or high stress. It's not it's not depression. These mental health conditions come from the sympathetic, the fight or flight side of your autonomic nervous system, right? So depression shows up at a very specific point, right? Depression, hopelessness, numbing symptoms, dissociation of any kind, right, shows up at a very specific point when your nervous system hits overwhelm, right? So let's say, again, you're that zebra, right, and you're giving it your all at that state 2 spot. And at some point, the lion gets the zebra. Not always, but sometimes she does. And when that happens, you know, the zebra's nervous system says, look, I'm giving it my all. I'm running as hard as I can and it's not working. So it hits this point of overwhelm. And what you see is this massive parasympathetic response that kicks in, right? So this is a big numbing response that turns on. And basically what's happening here is when your fight or flight, when your sympathetic nervous system and your attempts at solution and escape fail, what happens is that your body turns on passive solutions, right? Your active solutions have failed, your body turns on passive solutions, which is basically saying that, look, if you're gonna die, you might as well not feel it, right? So these are the symptoms of state 3, moderate overwhelm, moderate trauma, right? Lethargy, sleepiness, heaviness, collapsed posture, right? So, and again, guys, I'm not talking about regular sort of heaviness or regular kind of, you know, being sleepy when you're tired. I'm talking about, you know, the client that will come in and, you know, they'll be upset and irritable because of the amount of traffic it took to get to therapy. But then when we start working with, you know, the event that happened 8 months ago where 3 people died, they become uncontrollably sleepy, right? Sitting up in a chair, they start yawning, they feel really like their head feels like it's made of lead, their arms feel heavy, that kind of thing, right? So state 3 turns on collapsed posture, lessening muscle tension. You start to get foggy vision in state 3. And again, this is dissociation turning on, right? Nausea is a very common thing that happens in state 3. Confusion, right? So remember in states 1 and 2, you had fast thinking, sharp thinking. In state 3, you get sort of slowed, unfocused, confused thinking, slow thoughts, and suicidality. This is the first place on this map that suicidality has shown up. And this is because, again, in state 0, you don't need it, right? Everything's okay. In state 1 and 2, you're fighting for your life. You're fighting to escape. In state 3, escape failed, right? So your system is still looking for a way out, and it's starting to consider suicide as potentially a way out. It shows up as a solution, okay? And then finally, hopelessness, right? And here's the thing, guys. Hopelessness is almost always a part of any kind of this kind of overwhelm of working with trauma. A sense that whatever this is that they're experiencing is never going to end, right? It's never going to be over. A sense that it's always been here and it always will be here. There's no solution to it, right? And the thing is that people in state 3 think that is true, that's reality. And sometimes it may be true, but there's a lot of times when it's actually not true. That this sense of hopelessness is just a manifestation of this particular nervous system state, okay? And I'm not saying it wasn't true at some point, but usually when people are coming into therapy, they're out of the danger that may have created state 3, okay? Now, here's the other important component of what state 3 is about. It's what's called dual activated, right? So what I mean by that is that you get these sort of heavy, depressive, sleepy, numbing symptoms turn on while you still have the anxiety symptoms going on from states 1 and 2, right? So state 1 and think about it this way, that state 1 and 2 had to happen before state 3 turned on. And so all the anxiety, all the fear, all of that stuff from state 1 and 2 is still there, but it's being covered up by a big heavy wool blanket, right? All the anxiety responses are being muffled. They're still kind of there, but not at full strength, right? So a very difficult, a very painful experience where there's collapse and anxiety at the same time. Now, there a couple of things that I want to say about this, right? There's a really good reason why state 3 exists, why it's dual activated in the system, and it has to do with the presence or absence of solution, right? So think about it this way. Let's say you're that zebra, right? And the lion caught up with you, swatted you, and there's this big dust cloud, and everything clears, and then the zebra's sitting there, and the lion's sitting right beside it, right? And it's amazing. The zebra is not actually injured, but this animal that was running for its life just a moment ago is sitting there, and it's just kind of stunned, right? Because the chase is over. And so its system has gone into state 3. Now, let's say something happens. Let's say that there's a group of hyenas or something like that, and they're too close to the lion's cubs, to her den, and her cubs are being threatened. And so the lion has to get up and go deal with that situation. Now, the zebra has a lucky break, right? There's a break in the clouds here. And so the zebra's nervous system will say, wait, the lion is distracted, and it will move it will move back to state 2, and that zebra will be up and gone, right? And so basically state 3 shows up when things are bad, right? But it's not completely, it's not the end. Right? Things are bad, but there still may be a possible escape. Now, there's one important repercussion here of state 3 that I want to talk about that we see a lot of in the mental health world, which is anytime a psychiatrist, anytime a clinician sees this type of anxiety, lots of energy followed by depression and collapse, basically when you have hyperarousal followed by hypoarousal, basically the bipolar diagnosis comes out of the closet, right? Because anytime there's that cycling, people get frequently they'll get a bipolar diagnosis. And I'm not making a claim here. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as bipolar. I think there really is something there, with the mania that shows up in bipolar where you think you're the king of the world, things like that. That doesn't happen in what we're describing here. That grandiosity, that kind of distorted thinking doesn't happen in this what I'm describing. But what does happen is, again, big activation, fight or flight, anxiety, all of that kind of energy, and then collapse, right? So it's a very different thing. Now, the problem obviously is if you actually have events that created state 3 and you're having that kind of cycling with it, and then yet it's being misdiagnosed as bipolar and you're being medicated for bipolar, well, then the actual mechanisms by which your system can heal what's going on in this scenario are being blunted, right? So basically you need a responsive nervous system. You need to be able to feel the symptoms of state 3 in order to heal from it. And typically the medications that are used to treat bipolar prevent people from having and feeling their nervous system responses. Okay, so that's just a little side that I wanted to touch on. Now, I'm going to read you guys a quote here, a quotation from Bessel van der Kolk. And if you don't know, he is one of the most well-known researchers in the field of stress and trauma studies, right? So stress-induced analgesia, basically he's saying stress-induced numbing, has been described in experimental animals after a variety of inescapable stressors, such as electric shock, fighting, starvation, and cold water swim. In severely stressed animals, opiate withdrawal symptoms can be produced either by termination of the stress or by naloxone injections, right? So let me just break that down for you here. Like, what they're basically saying is there is a very powerful biochemical reaction that's taking place when inescapable shock shows up, right? So basically, they're taking these poor lab animals and they're putting them in these stressful situations that they cannot escape from. And that's the key here, right? So what creates state 3 is inescapable shock. If something was escapable, you would have ended up in states 1 and 2, right? So it has to be inescapable for this particular nervous system state to show up. Now, once that happens, and these chronically stressed animals are basically their brains are producing endogenous opioids, right? Basically, we have the capacity to produce our own opiate type chemicals in our brains that the nervous system that the brain produces in response to this level of threat. And what they found was that if they all of a sudden remove the animal from that kind of threat, right? So if they put it in safety, or if they used another drug, naloxone, to block the opiate that the brain is naturally producing, then you basically get this poor animal that's in this opiate withdrawal state because its brain has been producing these chemicals for so long that all of a sudden removing it creates withdrawal symptoms. Okay, so that's one piece here. The second thing I wanted to read to you from van der Kolk is, so 2 decades after the original trauma, right? What he's about to say here, he's referring to Vietnam vets, okay? So 20 years after the original trauma, opioid-mediated analgesia developed in subjects with PTSD in response to a stimulus resembling the traumatic stressor, which we correlated with the secretion of endogenous opioids equivalent to 8 milligrams of morphine, right? So again, guys, this is amazing to me. So basically 20 years after the Vietnam War, you get these vets that if they're triggered by some memory, by some echo of the war, their brains will put them back into this opioid numbed out state. And that is equivalent to about 8 milligrams of morphine, which is really significant. They use 4 milligrams of morphine in hospitals to manage really severe pain. So, right, so the brain is doing something here to say, whatever level of threat is going on here, we're going to numb you out from it. Okay? So, we're going to get to the final phase, the final stage on this nervous system map now. All right? So, let me first describe the difference here between state 3, what we just said, which was a possible solution that didn't work, right? And what we're calling severe overwhelm or severe trauma, which is a complete absence of solution. So let me put it this way. Let's say you're a kid and you're being abused, right? But there's one good place, there's grandma's house, and you can go to grandma's house every now and then or on the weekends, and things are safe and good there, right? So in that case, in the world of that little kid, there is a solution, right? Grandma's house. And the only problem is that they weren't able to live at grandma's house. They weren't able to get to grandma's house frequently enough to prevent the overwhelm, to prevent the trauma from happening. So they still have state 3. But in their psyche, in their world, grandma's house did exist. So that's the definition of state 3, right? State 4 is where there was no grandma's house. There was no place to escape to that made it better. There's no conceivable solution to what's going on, right? So think about, let's go back to that zebra example where the lion tackles the zebra, and let's say the lion then picks up the zebra and takes her into her den where there's 6 other lions waiting for the zebra, right? So at that point, the zebra's not getting out. There's no solution here for that zebra. So at that point, the nervous system says, okay, you really are gonna die, and it pushes more of those same opioids into the system, and we get to this much more profoundly numbed out state, right? So here is what it looks like on the map. Right? So there's state 3, and then those those 2 little train track lines that you're seeing there, where that's representing sort of, that more break in consciousness. It's a break in dissociation, into dissociation. And these are the symptoms of state 4. Blank affect, numbness, feeling disconnected, spaciness, right? So again, guys, look at it this way, that if you're about to die, you might as well get the morphine, right? You might as well not feel how bad this is going to be. You might as well not feel teeth sinking into your leg, things like that, right? Vision changes, clouded or tunnel vision, feelings of unreality, right? So this is where people don't feel quite real. They'll say things like, I feel like I'm not here, or I'm made of plastic, that kind of thing. This is the most dissociated state that we can get to as far as a nervous system response. People have other types of things that they might do, like dissociation, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder. That's something different from this. But as far as nervous system responses, this is the furthest out we get. People have out-of-body experiences here, right? They will describe from a third-person perspective. They'll see a memory from a third-person perspective, right? They'll describe, something happened to that poor person on the couch over there, but it's them, but they're describing it as if they're in the corner of the room or something like that. People feel floaty here, right? When patients will go into state 4 responses, they'll be sitting on the couch and describe feeling like they're floating above their body, that their head feels like a balloon that's just kind of tied to their body loosely. They won't even feel like a body, right? And guys, there's a couple of things here I want to really say about this, right? That, compare state 4 to state 3, right? State 4 is blank, it's numb, it's absent, right? It's missing a body. Versus state 3, you're still there. You're feeling horrible. You're feeling depressed and heavy and sad and hopeless, right? But those are feeling states. State 4 is a non-feeling state, right? It's the absence of feeling. And the real trick with it is that state 4 will feel like respite, right? It'll feel like a solution to people, because if you consider all of what was going on for somebody on that nervous system map before they got to state 4, right, things were pretty dire. And so when they hit state 4, their system just says, fine, you're just not going to feel this, right? And it feels like a little blessing to them. It feels like respite. It feels like whatever is going on, I can't be touched. Right? One way of conceiving of what state 4 is like, think of a storm or a hurricane, and state 4 is the quiet eye of the hurricane, right? It's the place where nothing's happening, no movement, no sensation. Everything is calm and peaceful in there, because again, you're on heroin in here, right? You're deep into this opioid response that your body is generating. Now, one other component to this is Oh, actually, hold on. Let me back up a little bit. So the trick then with working with state 4, it is very tricky because you're it's the thing that worked for people, right? It's the place that people feel like finally I can rest here. And so, it's very difficult to sort of convince somebody that they should or they can leave state 4, right? Think about it again, like it's like a quiet cave off in the distance, and people don't necessarily want to leave that cave. And in fact, most people, if they grew up in a state 4 childhood, right, meaning that there was so much chaos and overwhelm in their childhood that they kind of live here, then first of all, they're not even going to know that they're in state 4. Their brain works well, cognition works fine in state 4, right? There's no emotions to kind of screw up cognition. But people who grow up here, it's the water that they swim in. So they're not going to know that, wow, there's a whole world of feeling and sensation and emotion out there that they're missing out on, right? Okay, so the thing I wanted to get to about state 4 is that it's not dual activated, right? These are just numbing systems that have taken over. So whereas state 3, you get anxiety and depression at the same time, in state 4, no anxiety, right? Your system said, don't even bother with solution at this point. You're just gonna die. So it doesn't bother having access to the fight or flight response here, okay? I know I used a bloody animal example to describe how this nervous system map works. The thing though, guys, is that state 3 and state 4 are far more common than you would think, right? So if I can guarantee that if you have somebody with abuse, neglect, abandonment in their childhood, I can guarantee you that that person will have state 4 in their system, right? Again, it is actually fairly common. Most of the people that we see here are not veterans of wars. They're not people that have had, horrible car accidents and things like that. Most of the people that we see here are people who in early childhood had a chaotic family, or who there was something going on where their needs weren't being met, right? So, and the more profound, the more long-lasting sort of abandonment, abuse, chaos was in a person's childhood, the more that their systems are going to live in these nervous system states, and they may not even know that they're living in those states. So that's it, guys. That is the nervous system map. That's the entirety of it. There's a whole lot of details that I left out that we can talk about, but I can talk about this for a day and a half, basically. The repercussions of what it means in life and in mental health. But there are a couple of pieces that I did want to mention here that I think will really kind of bring it all together, right? So